Thank you.
Thank you.
Brad Miller. Brad Miller is a senior fellow at the Roosevelt Institute. Prior to joining the Roosevelt Institute, Mr. Miller served for a decade in the United States House of Representatives and was a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress. As a member of the House Financial Services Committee, Brad Miller led efforts to enact financial reform legislation and create the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Brad, it's good to see you.
Good to see you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. You get back-to-back Southerners as witnesses. I did represent North Carolina for a decade in Congress and served for that decade on the House Financial Services Committee. The Sanders campaign asked that I testify today on financial reform. Many on Wall Street and in Washington argue that injustice and dysfunction in our economy, the income and wealth inequality that results, and the two-tiered system of legal accountability are this year's political fad, like some quirky video that inexplicably goes viral for a while. They say we heard a lot about our rigged economy this year, but the 2020 election will be about something else. Come January, they say, the next administration's task will be to maintain a generally satisfactory status quo. Americans are now convinced, correctly, that our economy and to a large extent our government are not run for the benefit of the great majority of Americans trying to make an honest living, but for a handful of people who just get richer and richer. And the people who are getting richer aren't job creators. In fact, some are crooks. Those issues will continue to dominate our politics, and Americans will only grow madder until we fix what is broken in our economy. Much of the debate about Wall Street is about what can go wrong, about how we can avoid another financial crisis. But what happens when things go right is just as big a problem. We need Wall Street reform to deworm an economy badly weakened by unproductive, extractive, and just plain crooked conduct. Instead of a smooth, efficient flow of capital from savers to people who can put money to productive use, far too much money coagulates on Wall Street, and far too little is invested in research and development, new facilities and equipment, and better compensation for workers. In other words, our economic future. First, we need to break up the concentration of economic and political power on Wall Street. We need smaller and simpler financial institutions so we never again bail out Wall Street to prevent possible economic collapse. But we also need smaller and simpler institutions to stop the distortion of market forces when the biggest institutions have unlimited money to slosh around to take profits that are entirely at the expense of the rest of us. We can do that under existing legal authority, such as the living wills provisions of the Wall Street reform legislation, or better yet, by legislation to cap the size of banks or to separate investment and commercial bank functions, a return to Glass-Steagall. Second, prosecutors must enforce the law without fear or favor. Department of Justice officials acknowledge that frequently in the last decades, concerns about the disruption of the economy affected prosecutorial decisions. That undermines Americans' faith in the rule of law and in our democratic institutions. Third, consumer financial services must be accessible and free of predation. We need to protect the work of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, Republicans' new least favored agency, and we should make basic consumer financial services available in post offices as we have in the past, a public option for consumer financial services. Democrats have much in common. None of us would be creeped out to use the bathroom at Target. But the nation needs more from us than that. Mourners lined the train tracks when Franklin Roosevelt's remains were taken from Warm Springs, Georgia to Union Station. A reporter asked a grieving North Carolina man if he knew Roosevelt. The man said no, but he knew me. That's the party we have been in the past. It is the party we should be now and in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman, for your testimony. I really appreciate it. I want to get back to a question that I think Dr. West had asked yesterday to the Attorney General, Eric Holder, on equal justice under the law. We've been asking a question during this campaign, and the question that we've been asking is, how does it happen that young Americans, older Americans go out and smoke marijuana and they end up with a criminal record? Yet no one, not one major executive on Wall Street has gone to jail for their greed, recklessness, and illegal behavior. And we've seen since 2009, every major financial institution in this country has been fined over $200 billion, mostly for fraud and other types of activities. Goldman Sachs was recently, not too long ago, reached a settlement for $5 billion for fraudulent subprime mortgage securities. How can we fine these large institutions and still have not one major executive go to jail for that fraudulent behavior? And what can we do in the platform to make sure that if someone breaks the law on Wall Street, that they get prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law?
Thank you. Equal justice under law, the phrase you use is what appears at the top of the Supreme Court courtroom, and it doesn't say equal justice under law and some are more equal than others, like in Animal House. There clearly is a two-tiered system of justice now, of legal accountability. There will always be some prosecutorial discretion, but the factors that came into account in the last decade really offend the sense of justice of most Americans and offend my sense of justice. And although I think General Holder did not acknowledge it so much yesterday, others have. The head of the criminal division, Lanny Brewer, gave a speech to the New York City Bar Association, an important venue to speak about legal issues, and said frequently executives or lawyers for large financial institutions sat in his conference room and made presentations about the economic disruption that would come about if there was a vigorous criminal investigation and prosecution. And shortly after he gave that speech, announced with great fanfare this really tough, historic settlement with HSBC for money laundering, for repugnant regimes under international sanction, for nuclear proliferation, for state-sponsored terrorism, for genocide, for the Colombian and Mexican drug cartels, and on and on. And the press, to their great credit, they haven't always deserved great credit, but on this case said, what are you talking about? 1.9 billion is 5 weeks of profit, and you're not bringing criminal prosecutions against any executive or against the bank? And he said that they were concerned that if they brought criminal prosecutions against executives or the bank, HSBC, it was one of the world's biggest banks, it might bring the bank down, and he said might destabilize the global financial system. That is not an argument that is available to too many people. Eric Garner could not say, you can't arrest me for selling loose cigarettes, it might destabilize the global financial system. And Americans know that is not how our system of justice should work. There will always be prosecutorial discretion, but I think the platform at the very least should say that the President and the Attorney General should make sure that we have people who exercise that discretion who are committed to equal justice under law. And no one is more equal than anyone else.
Yeah, I'll just be quick. I actually want to just agree with Warren's point and in your remarks there. One very quick point. You talked a lot about the power of Wall Street and financial interests and referenced the banks, but I also would like to, part of Wall Street is shadow banking. Yeah. So I'd love for you to also talk about the deep, the fact that we really have two systems There are regulations for banks. We can debate whether they should be stronger, but there's an entirely really unregulated system in which a lot of people are moving more money towards
Right.
because of the lack of regulation. So I'd just like quick remarks on that issue.
Well, people mean two different things when they say shadow banking. It's
Yeah.
not exactly a well-defined term. One means shadow bank activities, which are things like the repo market, money market funds, and then institutions that aren't depository
like-
institutions that lend. Probably one of the major reasons that the shadow banking system has grown is because Congress has passed remarkably indulgent legislation that gives shadow bank lending, qualified financial contracts, absurd preference on insolvency. So Lehman Brothers was borrowing, I think it was like $70 billion overnight, every night in the repo market. And when they finally did collapse, that money was gone immediately. The strongest reform of the shadow banking system that I've seen, that I know of, and I know some of the candidates have talked about the issue more generally. I know that Secretary Clinton has spoken of the issue, but the 21st Century Glass-Steagall Act, Senator Warren, before she broke bad and ran for political office, was a bankruptcy professor at Harvard, and that bill includes a change in the way shadow bank loans are treated in insolvency, which would almost certainly mean that lenders would not continue to lend in the shadow bank system to Lehman or Bear Stearns up until the point where they leave a smoking crater in the ground from how spectacular their collapse is.